Well, anyway, I really do appreciate you coming and talking to us about your situation with your leases and about the situation in general that's going on in our two counties. Really do.
Well, I appreciate the invitation to come talk to you this morning.
So, just for people who maybe don't understand how state land works and land leases, I want to go into just a little bit of the history and have you fill in details about leases that you know firsthand. Okay. But basically, this dates back to almost the California Gold Rush of 1949, which triggered the Gadsden land purchase, which was in 1953 and 54. And with that purchase, then all of the land in the west of the United States became U.S. territory. Right. So Arizona was part of that. And in order to get people from the East Coast to the West Coast, they came up with an idea for a transcontinental railway. Most people learned that in, elementary school history. Sure. Probably. But that was in like 1953 to 1969.
Maybe 1869.
Or 18. I'm sorry, I've been saying the wrong dates all along. 1849, 1853, 1854, 1863, and 1869. So during that time frame, Arizona was a territory. It wasn't even a state. And the federal government decided that in order to pay for that railroad, they would make a checkerboard of land that would be privately owned and land that could be sold off to pay for the railroad. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we got the state land parcels. Then in 1912, this is 1912, they set up a state land trust to lease out that property. And the beneficiaries of it are institutions like our K-12 education, the land trust universities like U of A, which were meant to teach agriculture, some mining trade schools and mining hospitals, things that they needed to develop this country. And part of that was cattle, because I don't know if you've ever heard of the 5 C's of Arizona's economy, but climate, of course, is one of them, and then our copper mining, cotton, which is the one people usually forget because we aren't much of a cotton producer anymore, citrus, and cattle was a big part of the industry or the economy of this state for many, many years. So the leases to ranchers that were given out in probably in the 30s, a lot of them, but that was after the Depression and after World War II, and it came out of the scarcity of that time period. And it was meant for making sure, giving some food security to the American public. So that's how ranching really got a hold here in Arizona. And that's where the leases came from. But I don't know as much about the leases because I've never dealt with them firsthand. But I understand that they're like a 10-year lease, and that when it changes hands, sometimes there are auctions and stuff like that go on. And since your family has definitely dealt with that, you've dealt with it, maybe you can explain that process a little bit.
Sure. They are 10-year leases, but they are almost always renewed by the guy who had it before.
Right.
And it's always been something that you could pretty much bank on, that if you have Arizona lease land, you can pass your lease down to the next generation, or you could actually sell your allotment if you wanted to sell the ranch and get out of ranching, and somebody else could pick it up, and then it would be generational for them. it's really something that in my lifetime it's also almost been completely unheard of for anybody, at least in this part of the state, to ever lose one of their leases or be evicted from their lease land.
Right. Yeah. It's just amazing that this is happening now. And we'll get into what's happening with those leases and maybe a little bit about why that's happening. But first, just tell us your history, your family history, your ranching history, and how important those leases are to that.
Sure. My family history goes back in Arizona quite a long ways. My great-grandfather came to Arizona as a teenage kid. He was an orphan of the war. His father was killed in the Civil War. And there was a depression back east, and nobody could make a living. One of the few places that there were jobs anywhere in the nation was building railroad infrastructure in the West. And as a teenage boy, he came out here to do that. He was working with the construction of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, which now is the area about where Route 66 is.
Right.
And he came to Arizona working on that project in about 1878. And he worked on that project for a few years before it was finally completed. And one of the things that the railroad did, because they were kind of cash poor, they offered a lot of their employees the option to accept land, which the railroad had in abundance, in lieu of wages. And so he started accumulating land that way. And by 1900, he had accumulated enough land that he actually started his ranching operation. It was 1904 to be exact. And great-granddad lived until 1949. And so that's when it passed down to the next generation from him.
That's an amazing history. It really is the American history.
Right.
And should be admired and supported.
Well, yeah, thanks for that. We're proud of our ancestors here, for sure. I mean, and I don't mean to sound like I'm gloating about it, but I am proud of my ancestors and what they did to make a state for us all to live in.
Well, and the ability to survive in this land and to turn it into what it is today.
Right.
They are our history.
Right. Right. In those days, when people like great-granddad came here, nobody wanted to live in Arizona. It was considered like the most desolate, worthless piece of ground. And the government was actually encouraging people like him to come here and stay and try to build something out of it. And he was one that did it, and it took an awful lot of work, and it was dangerous. There were a lot of nefarious characters around in those days. There was a lot of violence, and you had to worry about that kind of stuff. And I think that generation really deserves the respect that you and I give them for what they went through.
Right. No, it was not an easy life. And like I said before, when I think about how hard it is to develop land here now, I only have to think about what they went through to make me feel like it's easier.
Right.
So then we come to what's affecting us presently today, the Orsted project that's infringing on your leases, and maybe you can give a little bit of that story.
In 2022, I received the first letter of its kind that I ever got from the Arizona State Land Department. And what was included in that letter was a map, and as well as some wording saying that a utility scale solar operation had applied to have the state leases in my family ranching allotment transferred over to them for the construction of a solar installation. At that time, I had a bare understanding of how industrial solar worked. When I looked at the map, I was absolutely shocked because of the amount of land that they were asking for. It was a total of like 30 square miles. I never imagined before that industrial solar needed that much land. Since then, I've educated myself and I understand how much land they do need. But at first I was shocked. It is all of it. They wanted all the land. All my state leases, all my neighbors' state leases, plus all the checkerboarded private property interspersed among it. They wanted all that, just a crazy amount of land, 30 square miles.
Yeah, solar should never be on farmland or rangeland. I mean, there are plenty of rooftops in this country that they could put it on, and there's the risk when these solar panels get damaged by hail and wind and things that happen for all of those rare earth minerals to end up in the soil and just make it unproductive.
Right.
And it's too precious to be treated that way. But particularly with ranching, the problem with solar versus wind, a lot of people just imagine, the cows grazing in between the turbines or whatever. But with solar, that's not the case.
That hasn't been what I have observed. There are 3 large solar facilities under construction now within a few miles of my house. And the installation is primarily done first. They bring in heavy equipment and they strip the soil and level it. And so we're taking all the topsoil off. And then they install the arrays, and they use a lot of heavy equipment to do that. And the arrays are installed pretty tightly so that they get as much acreage covered as they can. And so, yeah, when you treat ground like that in the Southwest primarily, especially, when you treat ground like that here, it's not going to regenerate.
No, the grama grass is really slow to regenerate.
Right.
And when you disturb large swaths of it like that, it affects the rest that is left.
Right.
But besides that, don't they fence the cattle out so they don't harm the solar? So there's no grazing.
They do. The whole facility is enclosed in a security perimeter. So we're talking a chain link fence about 8 feet tall with no climb stuff on the top of it. And nothing's getting in there. Not anything any bigger than a lizard is getting in there.
And I just read recently that in England they do it a little bit differently, so there are options. In England, they're not cattle people, it's more sheep, but they make the developer make their panel arrays sheep proof. Mm-hmm. And that's primarily by strengthening them, but also raising them up high enough so that the sheep can graze under. And they also make the developer go back and make sure that the pasture is healthy when the sheep are put back on it, so they can coexist together. But here doesn't seem to be any concession or any desire to mediate, negotiate, work with the people who, raise our beef.
Right. I think part of that might be because of the type of rangeland conditions we have here. Agrivoltaics isn't going to work anyway. I work back in England, I'm certain of it, because it's so easy to make grass grow in England. It'd be the same thing in the eastern United States too, or the Midwest. Grass just wants to grow everywhere. But here, once they've installed that installation, it's not going to grow grass again.
No, it'd be a decade at
Right.
least before it would even try to come back.
Right.
You can see that in places that have been overgrazed and stuff like that too.
Right.
Yeah. So it pretty much affects your ranching substantially, I would say. That's the only word I can use, but it's got to be devastating.
Well, yeah, it's devastating on a personal level because I've invested my retirement in this, and that's it. That's what my retirement is. Mm-hmm. Is this family ranch, right? And so if this happens, I have to sell the cows. I'll have that money to live on in my old age for a little while, but it's not going to last very long.
Right.
So I'm going to end up being destitute in my old age because, you can't be 60 years old and done nothing but cowboy for a living and then start all over. You are what you are at that point, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it's also devastating to me because I've got family that really, really loves this lifestyle and heritage and wants to take over.
Right.
And I hate looking my kids in the eye.
That's got to be the hardest.
And talking to them about this stuff, about there's a threat that this is going to be taken away from you, and you're not going to be able to raise your family in ranching the way I did, because my whole family really just loves that lifestyle.
Well, I can completely understand that. I moved out here about 15 years ago and invested in a 5-acre and then got another 5-acre and another 5-acre. So I only have 15 acres, but I have that view right there. And my whole plan for doing that was to create a legacy farm for my kids. I wanted to hand it off to them. So when they talk about putting towers that are as tall as the highest peak out there all around my property, 250 of them, it's the equivalent, well, to put it into perspective, I think the perspective of knowing that it's as tall as Green's Peak is pretty amazing. 780 feet tall these towers are. But when you try to put it in perspective for people who live in the city, the highest skyscraper in Arizona is only about 500 feet tall. So they're half again as tall as that. And most of the tall buildings that people are familiar with in the state are only around the 300-foot range. So it's very different from that. Then you add to it the fact that there are only 63 of those big buildings in the whole state, and they want to put 250 of these towers around here. That would be the equivalent of Tucson plus Phoenix added together and multiplied by 4 on 50,000 acres, and they're not putting anything in to suppress fire. In a city that size, you would have fire stations. There's nothing out there for fire prevention. Okay. It just isn't appropriate for this area.
I agree. It's not appropriate to mess with that. Look at that. It's the most beautiful little valley I have seen in a long time. That you don't mess with that. That's not just that I can't even find the way to describe how irresponsible I think it is to destroy something like this over these wind turbines that are never going to work that well. We've already demonstrated that. We've got a lot of turbines in this country already, and it's been demonstrated that they are just not working as advertised.
Right. Well, I think it's profane. That's the word that came to mind when you were searching.
Thank
profane.
you. I was reaching for a word and you had it.
But the other part of it is the water that they're using. You can see this dry lake, and at one point it was a fishing lake. It was sustainable enough that the Arizona Game and Fish stocked it on a regular basis, and now it's empty. And so is the one that's south of here, and so are 2 or 3 south of that. Mm-hmm. So we're already in drought, and who knows where that water went, if they're already pumping for their supply. I projected that it was going to take over 6 million gallons just to do the construction phase, and that's not including dust control or any of the things that they'll also do. But I was corrected and told that I missed that mark by a couple of decimal points, that it's in the billions of gallons that they're using. And to me, the land that they're putting these projects on over here is in the Little Colorado River watershed,
Right.
which is an adjudicated water source. All of the tribes in the area, the Apache, the Hopi, the Navajo, the Paiute, the Zuni, all have claim to some of that water. all three of the counties that are on the Little Colorado, so that would be Apache, Navajo, and Coconino, have rights to that water.
Right.
Every city in that area has rights to that water. There are actually 14,000 claimants in that suit.
Right.
So where are these projects getting their water, and how dare they, one, disturb the watershed, possibly damage the aquifer, and take that much water for their construction?
You know, we've got a really good aquifer underneath us, but a lot of people don't realize a lot of that water in the aquifer was put there in the Ice Age, and it's not being restored and recharged really to the extent that it used to be. And so if we go to drawing these crazy amounts of water out of that aquifer, we will deplete it.
Right. And there's also a chance that when they're doing their construction and blasting and doing anything like that, that they could crack the volcanic rock that's out here. It's very brittle. And then water does what water does. It'll just flow deeper.
Right.
Okay. So the aquifer could actually just disappear.
Right. Okay.
And they have no concern whatsoever.
So yeah, what's the implications of that? Our springs are going to dry up. Maybe some of these creeks are going to dry up. Everybody's wells are going to dry up. Oh, that's going to be a horrible scenario.
Well, the thing of it is that when you look at reports about the drought in Arizona and that sort of thing, they try to put the blame on population growth. Okay, they try to put the blame on people using too much water to wash their clothes, wash their cars, like you said, and water their lawns. But they're not talking about projects like this, projects like data centers, projects like chip builders, projects like mines that come in here and use billions. They want us to cut back 10 gallons on our usage. It's not the same thing.
Right.
And, you know, Lake Mead is at an all-time low. It's almost a dead pool where the electricity from Lake Mead will stop flowing. But they want to put a project up here with wind turbines that could disrupt more water going to Lake Mead. And it's at best intermittent, because when the wind doesn't blow, it doesn't create electricity. Right. When the wind blows a lot, it creates a lot, but if they don't have batteries to store it in, it's just wasted. It's just lost. Okay. And after the 10 years of subsidies that they get for these projects from the federal government, they stop maintaining them. So it's temporary.
Right.
It's basically the length of a lease.
Right.
on land. And that's why they are leasing the land rather than buying it, because they don't want to have damaged land as their responsibility after they're done walking away from it in 10 years.
I think that is an extremely important point, because it's almost universal among these renewables. They always want to lease. They don't want to buy the land. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what that's about.
They don't want the liability.
They don't want the liability or the long-term responsibility.
Right. They are not accountable. So, I think that's all that I was planning on discussing. But I know you have some points that you want to make. You know, it's really disheartening, the prospects of such a short-sighted governance doing this to the land and to all the people who live on it, who live here, who love the rural lifestyle and think that what we have here is priceless. You know, it is priceless.
Well, I would tell folks to consider that even in the best case scenario with the renewables that they're wanting to put here, best case scenario is we're going to have a short-term solution. You know, worst case scenario is that it's not going to be any solution at all. It's going to be nothing but negative. But best case, it's going to be a short term, because this stuff does not last. The turbines and the solar panels don't last. And I think we really ought to think about long-term solutions to meeting our energy needs. Long-term solutions that don't include disrupting wildlife, disrupting landscape, disrupting rural economies, disrupting people's rural way of life. There's no reason to do it. You know, when they shut the Cholla power plant down over near where I live, they ordered it shut down in the Obama administration. I think it was in 2014. They finally got it shut down in 2024. During that time, they could have been developing infrastructure to convert that plant into a natural gas operated power plant, and it could be up and operating by now.
Right, they're starting to do that with Springerville
Right.
and SRP. Now that coal isn't such a demon anymore,
Right.
but they are still converting to gas. But there's also talk of converting to nuclear,
Right.
and even taking our old warheads that are getting obsolete, and turning them into power
Right.
for the community. And so there are many options. And it is proven that the turbines are not efficient, not sustainable. So I wish that people would take an attitude that we are just temporary residents here. We're borrowing the land for a while, and then we hand it off to our offspring so that they can also enjoy it, instead of just taking from it
Right.
what they want to take.
Right.
And for foreign developers to come in and make billions more dollars just so they can have billions more dollars. It's not for a good reason.
It's not for a good reason at all. And it's important that you pointed out that these are foreign. Every single one of these large renewable conglomerates is foreign owned. And a lot of them are not only foreign owned, but they're owned by foreign states. They're state owned. Like Ørsted, for example, is largely owned by the state of Denmark. So, there's national security implications in this as well.
Right. Repsol has a really bad reputation in its home country of Spain. But all of them, they will have like an Arizona LLC that they'll come and
Right.
form. And then they'll have a company that owns that LLC, and that company is just developing it and handing it off.
Right.
But if you scratch the surface, they all go back to foreign ownership, and a lot of them go back to Vanguard as an investor.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of the Vanguard part of it, but that's very interesting. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, you have to trace it up. You really have to dig on some of them.
Yeah.
They keep it hidden.
Yeah.
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 Well, I think we've discussed what people should hear. I
Well,
appreciate it.
I really appreciate you having me on. I hope that anybody who sees this decides to become active. Try to help. Contact your representatives and your senators and your governors and everybody, and just let them know there's options.
Right. That's a good point. I should have brought that up. But you can contact your county, your state, your federal, and then there are agencies like the Water Department, the State Land Department, FAA, FCC. There's a lot of things that are involved in this, and I do have all of those addresses listed on the YouTube channel in postings. There's a posting called Democracy in Action. And then there's another one for the agencies that I'm working on right now. But yeah, definitely, people, please react. Please try and keep the land what it should be.
We would really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.